In the January 1944 dawn on Zurich's Bahnhofstrasse, the fog had not yet been broken apart by bankers' shoes. James Carter and Vivian Lawrence were not aiming for a guarded vault. They were after something that flowed invisibly along this street: credit, and the clearing instructions that made it real. The true war was being fought inside the telegraph office against its yellowing walls. Through an intermediary, James used a stack of Swiss franc cash that would be hard to trace to buy the silence and cooperation of a night shift clerk at the Central Telegraph Bureau. He did not ask for message contents; those were layered in encryption, impossible to crack on short notice, but for something more primitive: traffic patterns. In a specific 2-hour window, he wanted the send times and durations of encrypted commercial cables sent from a particular code designation at the Reichsbank in Berlin to 3 major commercial banks in Zurich, then forwarded to a Swedish trading company in Stockholm. He also wanted the intervals, the gaps between those outgoing bursts and the Swiss bank's return confirmations. Those heartbeats, made of Morse dots and dashes, were recorded by James in pencil on graph paper until they became a jagged waveform. The heartbeats slowed, James said, in a safe house on the city's west side, crammed with old financial yearbooks and railway timetables. He pointed at the chart as he spoke to Vivian. The air smelled of stale paper and dust. In normal cross-border letters of credit confirmation, the internal review and reply inside a Swiss bank runs with fixed intervals, like Swiss watchwork. But this one... His pencil stabbed hard at 3 abnormal peaks. Every confirmation is almost 90 minutes longer than the standard chain, and before each delay there's a very short cipher sent directly from Berlin to Wold Private Bank. Vivian leaned in. She was better at reading people than data, but even she could see the pattern's kink. Wold, they're known for managing ultra-high net worth assets, especially for clients who don't want their names on anything. Are they handling estate procurement? Not entirely. James picked up his slide rule. The cool metal sharpened his thinking. He flipped through trade finance guides he had borrowed from a library archive, scanning fast. Look here. In the standard process, if the applicant insists that part of the fund's beneficial interest be temporarily isolated into a third-party escrow account as performance enhancement, it triggers extra compliance review and the whole chain slows. He looked up, understanding flashing in his eyes. Someone is setting up a private escrow account inside the money that buys steel for Germany's war machine. They're using state credit to wash a personal escape route. There's a rat in the pipe building himself a branch line. That discovery laid the foundation for Operation Quartz's first intervention. The joint OSS and SIS directive they had received was clear and cold. No bombs, no gold bars. Use finance and psychology like surgical tools to cut the arteries that fed Nazi procurement through Switzerland. The goal was to create friction, to make every transaction more expensive, slower, and more paranoid. James's battlefield was numbers and clauses. He spent 2 full days studying the trade finance structure the target German firms were most likely using, almost certainly documentary letters of credit. His point of entry was the additional terms and bank charges. He designed a maneuver through a small Swiss brokerage that appeared fully independent but had quiet funding ties to British intelligence. He would solicit quotes from several private banks that handled related business. The product was a highly customized forward FX risk hedging package, priced in a way that was complex, plausible, and laced with subtle pessimism about German credit. The banks would not buy it. They did not need to. It only had to land like a special stone dropped into a pond. These inquiries will show up in traders' daily briefs, James explained to Vivian, his finger tracing an invisible chain in the air. The signal isn't market risk. It's a compliance scent that this class of transaction is being specially watched. Traders' instinct is to avoid risk. The simplest way is to nudge up the service fee or demand stricter collateral when they quote for these deals. Vivian's job was to dress that cold financial logic in a narrative that made people uneasy. Risk needs a story before people truly feel afraid, she said. Her new cover identity was Eleni Moreau, a young widow with property in Lausanne and a hobbyist's interest in international finance. Her story hinged on liquidity anxiety. I heard from my uncle's office in Bern, strictly private, of course, that some banks heavily dependent on German business have been asking the Swiss National Bank for temporary allocations of physical gold unusually often. That's perfectly legal, naturally, but the quantities and timing, she let the thought hang just long enough to land. It's hard not to wonder whether the final stage of certain large cross-border settlements is hitting some non-technical obstacle. After all, our prosperity rests on everyone believing in the absolute solidity of the Swiss franc and Swiss banks. Any hint that solidity needs unusual dependence on one party's gold flows is worth noticing, isn't it? In scene 3, she delivered that worry, half chat, half concern, at a lakeside club cafe that required introductions to enter. She shared it with an asset manager closely tied to Wold Private Bank. The cafe buzzed with murmurs, the light clink of cups and cigar smoke. The man was an old-school gentleman, hair slicked into place. He lifted an eyebrow and stirred his coffee with a silver spoon, slow and deliberate. An interesting observation, Mrs. Moreau. In times like these, prudence is indeed a virtue. He smiled, but his eyes stayed flat. 20 minutes later, he left early, polite and careful. Market reaction appeared within 36 hours. James saw that a mid-sized bank handling part of the German flow raised its issuance fee on Germany-related letters of credit from 3 per milli to 3.5 and added a clause about more frequent collateral revaluations. The first ripple had formed. Almost at the same time, the safe house phone, used only for one-way emergency contact, rang. Vivian answered. A mechanically altered voice, German accent precise, spoke a short sentence. "The doctor is evaluating your brokerage's inquiry pattern." Click, dial tone, cold rose through them. They knew the doctor. Heinrich Wolf, the Reichsbank's clearing specialist stationed in Switzerland, a man who maintained financial systems like a precision clock. His counterstrike came fast and clean. Within a day, the brokerage reported that every abnormal inquiry had received a counterquote, unusually quick, unusually generous, from another well-connected bank with deep ties to German capital, effectively neutralizing any suspicion their inquiries might have seeded. More blatantly, the mid-sized bank that had raised fees and tightened terms quietly reversed the changes, as if they had never existed. In their place was an almost eerie efficiency and generosity on a different German-linked transaction. "He didn't just notice the stone," James said in scene 4, staring at the latest data in the safe house, face drawn. The ashtray was packed with cigarette butts. He picked it up, studied it, and swapped in a smoother one that won't raise ripples, then flattened ours completely. "He's telling us he understands our trick, and he has the weight to rewrite the rules." Vivian leaned against the table with the typewriter. The air thickened with frustration and rising danger. To him, are we just children scribbling in an adult's ledger? No. James lifted his heavy brass slide rule. The cold steadied him. His response is too standard, too systematized. Like a program. Detect abnormal signal, launch investigation, use higher level authority, probably bill inside credit backing, to erase the anomaly, restore the system to default. What he protects is the system's cleanliness, not messy reality. A thought began to form. If he's that committed to erasing noise, then what if we give him noise loud enough that he has to deal with it, a target that draws his full attention? A feint? Vivian arched an eyebrow. More precise. Show false. Hide true. James moved to the Europe map on the wall. We give him an obvious financial leak that forces him to commit resources and attention to repair it. The real attack sits elsewhere, inside the stories you've already started planting about gold dependence and neutrality risk. Financial terms can be rewritten overnight. Doubt rooted in people's minds once it sprouts grows on its own. He turned eyes on the map's southwest corner. But before we lay the bait, maybe we should light a small fire where he isn't looking yet. German tank armor needs tungsten. Portugal is a primary source. Those deals happen more outside law, paid in cash, jewelry, and spoken promises. We go add fuel to their tungsten price. The Portuguese sun won't cure Zurich's cold, the fixer who introduced them to an intermediary said, but the shadows there are good for business. Scene 5 took place in a basement bar hidden behind warehouses along the limit. The stairs were narrow, the air mixed river stink, mildew, and cheap cigar smoke. The intermediary called himself Fernando. His eyes were always pricing the world. James played a cautious accountant for a South American mining family. Vivian played the naive but well-funded heiress curious about rare minerals. The object was not spot metal, but a priority purchase right on tungsten concentrate scheduled to ship out of Portugal over the next 6 months. A ghost contract sustained by handshake, down payment, and spoken commitment. James offered a diamond deposit. Divisible, stable in value, hard to trace. The Germans like shiny things too, Fernando said, pinching a half-carat stone. Vivian slid forward. He examined it under a dim gas lamp, the light fractured into cold fire across its facets. They pay in gold bars or Swiss franc cash. More traditional. He tossed it back into the velvet pouch, a soft thud. Your priority right means I have to persuade mine owners and transport crews to shift a portion away from old customers and register it under your name. That takes extra persuasion. So we pay a premium, James said evenly. He opened a smaller case with a few larger stones. That's the extra persuasion. But we require a matching right. At the same price, we can match any competing offer. Put simply, if someone outbids us, we get a chance to meet the price. Fernando grinned, teeth yellowed by smoke. Accountant, you're creating a miniature market. Interesting. He took the case. Oral agreement stands. I'll tell you the first pickup time and the dockside warehouse number, but... He paused, gaze sweeping Vivian's carefully naive face. In the shadow business, the ink of contracts is trust, and trust spoils easily these days. Outside the river wind cut, Vivian shivered. He doesn't believe our identities. He doesn't need to, James said, pulling up his collar. He only needs to believe diamonds. Our first goal is achieved, raising tungsten cost. He'll use our deposit to prepay upstream, and he'll spread word that a new buyer is competing. Price floats up. The Germans, to maintain volume, either pay more or apply diplomatic pressure in Lisbon. Either way, costs increase. Days later, the black market network reported unusual hikes in Portugal's offshore tungsten quotes and the overland transport fees toward the French border. Yet the expected news of German procurement disruption did not arrive. Instead, fragments from OSS Lisbon suggested the Germans had stabilized supply temporarily through a more circuitous route via Italy and by drawing down certain stocks from occupied territories. They activated a backup route, James said in the safe house, studying the map. We narrowed the pipe. We didn't stop the flow. Water still gets through. Slower, pricier. He rubbed his brow. The first intervention had been neutralized by Dr. Wolf. The second black market maneuver had been absorbed by redundancy. Frustration began to stack. Then, in Scene 6, crisis arrived quietly. A local lookout tasked with perimeter warning delivered a vague alert. Unfamiliar faces had appeared on the street of the safe house, and a black sedan had been seen twice at different times. They had to move. The relocation was rushed and tense. Vivian handled documents, feeding most into the fireplace. Critical pieces were wrapped in oiled paper. James dismantled the shortwave set's crystals. They left separately through the back, agreeing to meet at the second of 3 fallback contacts. Cutting through an alley, James noticed a man leaning against a wall who seemed too absorbed in his newspaper. James changed route, used trams and crowds to shake any tail, his heart hammering from the run. Rain arrived without warning, soaking his coat, cold against his back. When they regrouped at the third fallback and cramped top-floor apartment, James checked his belongings and his face changed. From his inner pocket, he pulled a notebook, open to a page with scratch calculations on tungsten cost and transport routes. I use Schneider's specialty grid paper. It's thin, sold only at an old stationery shop near the train station. I just restocked yesterday. If someone sifts the ash from what we burned or learns my preference another way, it becomes a traceable lead, Vivian finished, voice tight. They had left a mark, tiny but enough for a professional hunter to smell. Scene 7's emergency meeting was set on the deck of a scheduled passenger boat on Lake Zurich. Their handler, Professor, wore a heavy coat like an ordinary academic afraid of wind, his gaze sweeping distant hills across the water. Dr. Wolf has classified your activity as an organized attempt at economic sabotage. He reported it to Berlin. A representative from the SS Economic Affairs Office posted to Switzerland has begun showing interest. This is no longer purely a financial game. Wind blurred his voice. At the same time, The Swiss Federal Police and the Cantonal Police have received vague complaints about abnormal market volatility and are making informal inquiries. You're under 2 sets of eyes now. We need a more effective strike, James said low. Small moves get absorbed. Agreed. Professor handed over a slim steel cigarette case. Inside was microfilm. Headquarters approved the false asset transfer list plan. The objective is to create suspicion, trigger a trust crisis inside the Nazi apparatus and between them and their Swiss custodians. The list must look real enough to survive the most basic screening, but it must contain controlled flaws only we know so we can disprove it if needed or steer any investigation, he paused. Dr. Wolf, Heinrich Wolf, was once a respected young economics professor at the University of Berlin. In 1937, he left academia for reasons unknown and entered the Reichsbank. He may understand senior officials' financial habits better than you do. Don't underestimate him. In Scene 8, the fallback site became a forgery workshop. Chemical solution, ink, and old paper saturated the air. James built the list's internal truthiness. Using OSS fragments, he fabricated 12 names, Nazi officials, senior SS commanders, and industrial magnates. For each, he designed plausible offshore asset categories, Swiss private accounts, Liechtenstein foundations, equity stakes in Argentine real estate. He created a complex numbering system with consistent internal logic, mimicking German finance ministry indexing. Vivian gave it physical reality. She acquired an old Olympia portable typewriter, replaced worn type slugs to match a Berlin office's known face. She used carbon paper and thin security stock to create layered copies, simulating departmental circulation. She even obtained samples of the blue-gray cover paper used on late 1930s German official files. The flaw can't be a typo or absurd numbers, she said, as she used a special lightly faded ink to imitate time-worn edges. It has to be a systematic microdeviation. For example, in this numbering system, I deliberately make the check-digit algorithm use an early obsolete version rule when it touches certain dates like Hitler's birthday. Unless you were one of the few archivists who designed the system and revised it, you'd miss it. After nights of work, they produced a document that could pass at a glance. Preliminary internal memorandum on the review of overseas asset arrangements for certain individuals. An unofficial circulating copy. It looked like a leaked fragment from a much larger investigative report. Scene 9 moved to dissemination. Their chosen node was a journalist who ran with Zurich's financial scandal sheets. Vivian staged a scene in which a frightened bank insider misplaced documents. The journalist found the list in a public archive. His eyes lit behind his glasses. He rubbed his hands, thrilled. Then the plan veered. Instead of launching immediate reporting, the journalist hid the bombshell and went to show it off to his secret lover, a senior secretary at Wold Private Bank, perhaps to prove his importance. She was far more cautious. Understanding the danger, she told him nothing. She quietly copied the list and delivered it to her superior, one of the bank's partners, Erich Huber. The list never reached public rumor. It fell directly into the hands of someone who understood its financial and political explosive force. When Vivian learned through another channel that the document had reached Huber, cold ran through her spine. Huber wasn't a journalist. He was a sharp vulture who knew how to turn danger into gold. Scene 10 turned the fallback site's air into stone. James slammed his fist into the table, knocking over a glass. It rolled into the carpet without breaking, making a dull thump. It's out of control. Completely out of control. Huber is a banker. He knows how lethal this is to the Germans, and even more lethal to the men named on it. He'll blackmail, he'll charge both sides. Then make him disappear, Vivian snapped, a hard edge James had never heard in her voice, before he causes irreversible damage. Physical removal is clean. Murder? James stared at her. What are we? SS. Our mission is to create chaos, not execute civilians. And if he vanishes, what do we do with the body? His disappearance will trigger a wider investigation and drag every eye here. He's a grenade with the pin pulled. Vivian stepped closer. Your moral cleanliness is worth what in wartime? Can your slide rule calculate that price? The argument nearly tore their fragile partnership. Then a local courier brought fresh intelligence. Huber had not acted openly yet, but he had quietly arranged a meeting with a commercial attaché at the German legation. Meanwhile, his office lights had been on late more than once. Visitors came, identities unknown. He's waiting for the highest bid. James forced himself to slow down. Or he's afraid and doesn't know what to do with something this hot. He's probing both sides. Or setting a trap, Vivian said, anger cooling into analysis, trying to lure out whoever planted it. Either way, control was gone. Worse, within 2 days, they confirmed that personnel from the SS Economic Affairs Office had arrived in Zurich to investigate privately a leak of documents that may damage the Reich's economic security and officials' reputations. At the same time, the Swiss Federal Police, prompted by an anonymous tip about foreign powers using Swiss banks for illegal political funds, likely smoke thrown by Huber or the Germans, opened preliminary questioning. The net tightened from both sides, and the fuse sat in Erich Huber's greedy, frightened hands. They had shifted from disruptors to prey. Their only chance might be to turn this runaway crisis into a larger fire, burning a path out while still completing the original mission, forcing the Germans into fundamental distrust of Switzerland's financial pipeline. The blade hung overhead and the hilt was slick with sweat in Erich Huber's grip. Under extreme pressure, Scene 11's layout began. This was no longer financial modeling, it was a psychological drama on a knife edge. Vivian stripped away Eleni Moreau's elegance. In dark clothes, with a changed gait and a deliberately painted shadow of exhaustion, she became a new character. A cold operative employed by someone high on the list. She happened upon Huber outside the quieter cigar shop he frequented after work. "Mr. Huber," she said, voice low, professionally indifferent, "the owner of the original is not pleased that you have a copy. He asked me to ask you, is your bank vault safer than Berlin's underground shelters?" Her eyes took in his face as it froze. Some people will pay for it to disappear. Others will pay more for it to appear where it shouldn't. Which side you stand on determines whether you walk into your office next week. Huber went pale under the street lamp, trying to hold his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." The 7th entry's account number uses the pre-November 1938 check-digit algorithm. Vivian gave a precise detail, one of James's controlled flaws, enough to prove she, or whoever she represented, was close to the source. Think about who could know that. Berlin has started internal checks. Do you think they'll find us first or resolve the person who let this list escape? She pressed a thin envelope, empty, into his trembling hand. "Inside are instructions for what you do next. Don't open it. There may be eyes nearby." In reality, the envelope held nothing but a blank sheet, but fear would fill the empty space. As she turned away, she added in German, almost casually, "Dr. Wolf's people are watching too, but they only care about data flow. They won't save you." The point of the threat was not to force Huber to surrender the list. It was to seed two understandings in his already panicked mind. First, the people behind the list had targeted him and could access core details. Second, Dr. Wolf's system, the clearing apparatus, and the big men behind political violence might be misaligned, even hostile. Huber became skittish enough to read any movement as lethal. At the same time, James ran the other wing. At a public post office, using a communal typewriter, he assembled an address from newspaper clippings and mailed an anonymous letter to the office of the rotating chairman of the Swiss Bankers Association. The letter avoided threats and adopted the tone of a worried insider warning. "Honored Sir, we have reason to believe that certain German organs are deliberately exploiting or even manufacturing scandals or investigations alleging that officials are transferring assets through Swiss channels. Their long-range purpose may be to create public justification at a chosen moment, such as if the war turns unfavorable, to systematically delay, discount, or politically repudiate certain lawful or grey zone debts held in Switzerland. If successful, this would fundamentally undermine international confidence in Swiss financial neutrality and the sanctity of contracts. We advise the association to be vigilant regarding any unusual German audit or freezing demands in the near term, as these may be preparatory." The letter never mentioned a specific list, but it struck Swiss bankers at their deepest fear: sovereign credit and industry reputation. The two baits were out. The next 48 hours were waiting and observation under strain. From informants, they learned that Huber did not follow the instructions in the non-existent envelope. Instead, he behaved exactly as his character and situation predicted. He took his copied list and his own analysis, twisting Vivian's flaw detail into supposed evidence of an internal clearing faction fight, and sought an urgent meeting with his contact, the German legation's commercial attaché, demanding access to someone who can handle real security matters. Scene 12 staged itself in an unremarkable suite at an upscale Zurich hotel. Heavy curtains blocked out side eyes. Cigar smoke and tension filled the air. The SS Economic Affairs Office representative was a hard-faced, middle-aged man with no patience for financial nuance. Dr. Wolf was there too, in a tailored dark suit, brow furrowed as he reviewed the copy Huber brought. "This document is forged," Dr. Wolf said at last. Voice calm but certain, he pointed to the flaws James and Vivian had planted. "Here, the check-digit rule. Here and here. They imitate older formats, but the iteration logic breaks in subtle places. The flaw is designed. The purpose is to ensure that under a certain level of scrutiny, the document becomes suspect, guiding the investigation." He looked up at the shaken Huber. "You have been used. Someone wants us to distrust one another and sabotage trust with our Swiss partners." Huber flared. "But they knew details. The woman who came to me, she named the flaw precisely. If it's forged, why would the forger threaten me and hint that you—" He glanced at the SS representative. "And the doctor might not see things the same way." The SS man's expression darkened. He did not care about check-digit algorithms. He cared about the implications, internal checks, faction struggle, and the fact that an outside operative had approached and threatened a Swiss banker doing business with the Reich. That was a security red line. "Doctor," he said coldly, "can you be 100% certain it is forged, based on some numbers? Just if, part of the list is real and only mixed with flaws? If senior figures are using our clearing channels for private gain and we ignore it because we're fixated on a few numbering rules, who answers when the Führer demands accountability?" Dr. Wolf tried to pull him back to logic. "That is exactly what the planners want, an internal audit spiral that consumes attention while driving a wedge between us and Swiss banks." He was cut off by an urgent cable delivered to the suite. The SS man read it and grew grimmer. He handed it to Dr. Wolf. The message from a colleague in Bern reported that the Swiss Bankers Association had informally conveyed concern. They had heard that German authorities might impose non-economic interference on normal trade settlements due to internal politics. The association wanted clarification and warned that any action damaging Switzerland's financial reputation would carry serious consequences. The anonymous letter and the hotel meeting became a lethal coincidence in time. To the SS representative, this was no longer a contained financial game. It was a signal that Switzerland might already be alert, layered atop the possibility of internal corruption and leak risk. The situation became dangerously sensitive. "Doctor," the SS man said at last, decision final, "until the facts are fully clarified, I recommend that all non-urgently essential strategic material settlements routed through Switzerland, especially large renewals and new openings of letters of credit and any gold delivery and allocation requests, be temporarily suspended. We will await further instruction from Berlin headquarters and the security service. We need internal screening and we need to observe Swiss reaction." Security thinking defeated financial thinking. Fear, not efficiency, wrote the rule. Dr. Wolf understood what the order meant: delayed supply chains, higher procurement costs, and fractures with Swiss partners that might never heal. He could not fight it. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, exhausted. The blockage formed by the least logical means at the critical node of the system he had tried so hard to keep clean. Scene 13 returned to the fallback site. The incinerator flame danced as they destroyed the last evidence, paper curling black, becoming ash. The shortwave set was broken down. Parts were dropped beneath different bridges along the limit. The room held only 2 packs and a spreading emptiness. "We succeeded," Vivian said without joy, only deep fatigue. "The channel will be chaotic for weeks, maybe months, enough that somewhere, east or west, there will be dozens fewer tanks." "Word from the handler," James said, watching the final scrap of paper waiting to burn. "Because of procurement delays and the cost of alternatives, the Germans reduced the hardening proportion on the side armor of a certain assault gun model." He paused, voice dry. "But there's also intelligence that to compensate for tungsten shortage, they forcibly requisitioned a stock of specific alloy steel from a precision instrument factory in the occupied Netherlands. The factory shut down. Workers were driven into more dangerous war plants. When we raised tungsten prices, we didn't calculate that." Silence held, only the fire's crackle remained. Then Vivian spoke, eyes not on him. "The third name on the list, the SS brigade leader. In 1942, an order of his in Ukraine cost me my sister and her 2 children. When I typed his name, the pen almost punched through the paper." For the first time, she spoke the past she had never named. James looked at her profile lit by firelight. "So you wanted to kill Huber for more than the mission?" "Part of it," she admitted. "Well, but you were right. We're not judges. We're not executioners. We're pipe fitters. We use dirty tools to clog dirtier pipes." She stood, shouldered her pack. "Time to go. You back to London?" "Yes, and you?" "There's a place I want to see. I haven't decided." Vivian held out her hand. James took it and squeezed. Brief, firm, cold fingers and a warmth that vanished as soon as it appeared. They said no goodbyes. One after the other, they left the room without sound, dissolving into Zurich's not yet awake morning fog, walking toward different directions. Scene 14 jumped to 1980 in a lecture hall at a Midwestern American university. The air smelled of old carpet, chalk dust, and overheated radiators. An elderly James Carter had just finished a talk on historical cases of non-traditional national security methods, abstract and cautious by necessity. As the room emptied, he gathered his notes slowly. A figure appeared in the doorway, backlit, then stepped closer. Vivian. Time had marked her, but her eyes were still sharp. Without small talk, she handed him a yellowed Swiss newspaper clipping. It held a small bilingual obituary. Banker Erich Huber died in Geneva in 1978, cause unspecified, age 72. "He lived longer than we did," Vivian said. "Apparently neither Berlin nor Bern hurried to punish him," James said, studying the clipping. "I found some material," Vivian said evenly. "The declassification wave has started. Fragments surfaced. A 1953 OSS internal review memo on Operation Quartz, or similar economic disruption, said it may have produced a noticeable delay effect on the supply of certain armor steel models in 1944 to 45, estimated at weeks to months, but cannot be precisely quantified due to mixed battlefield records and incomplete German wartime production data, and this conclusion is disputed. Another report said the operation's impact on enemy financial intermediation costs cannot be separated from other economic war factors. She looked up at James. "That's all we left behind. A may. A cannot be precisely quantified. A dispute. No hard numbers. No medals engraved with achievement. Only the two of us know what we burned in that safe house and what we said." She paused, then asked the question that arrived 36 years late. "Was it worth it with those costs?" James did not answer at once. He folded the clipping carefully and slipped it into his inner pocket, feeling the brittle edge of paper. Outside, in a peaceful era, students crossed the lawn, laughing, books in their arms. "You later," he said at last, voice light, turning the question back. "Did you ever find peace?" Vivian looked at him for a long moment. A faint expression crossed her face, too thin to read as smile or not. She did not answer. She only nodded once, perhaps farewell, and turned, walking into the crowd thinning at the end of the corridor, disappearing. James stood alone in the emptied lecture hall. Sunset gilded row after row of seats with warm edges. He touched the pocket on his chest where the folded clipping lay, trivial and heavy at once. He knew some ledgers never truly closed. Some costs, once paid, were denominated in a currency called silence. History's final verdict was often nothing more than hesitation. He switched off the lectern light and walked out, blending into an ordinary twilight, one he had, in his own way, helped make possible.